Benjamin Franklin had written, "Nothing is certain except death and taxes."
Oh, I didn't see your card.
But what we know is true here in Marin is that we could add traffic to that. And kind of giving context for today, there's a bit of this quality of the more things change, the more they stay the same. So giving you just a context for some of what we'll hear today, in 1990, voters approved doubling the state gas tax, and it was designated to keep traffic levels manageable. And when we think that they doubled the state tax on gasoline, that's when gasoline was about $1.20 a gallon, so we can see how things have changed just in knowing what we pay today. And at that time, the state created congestion management agencies that were the agencies by which money could be distributed from federal to state to regional metropolitan transportation to local jurisdictions for dealing with traffic. So that was 1990. Then in 2004, voters in Marin passed Measure A, a half-cent sales tax, and guess what the goal of that was? It was to improve mobility and reduce local congestion by providing more transportation options. So it's like here we are in 2015, when if you ask people what some of the biggest concerns are in the county, it's where traffic comes up again. So it's just really, I'm so pleased that we've got these two people willing to come and talk with us about digging into something that is that complex and has been going on for so long. So we've got TAM, the Transportation Authority of Marin, administering the Measure A money and acting as Marin's congestion management agency. They oversee a budget of $38.5 million, and they're governed by a board, like so many boards of some of our agencies, that's comprised of elected officials from the 11 cities and towns in Marin County, and in the case of TAM, it also includes all 5 of the Board of Supervisors sitting on that governing agency. So our first speaker today, and I'm going to introduce both speakers and then they'll speak sequentially. Our first speaker today will be Stephanie Moulton-Peters, who's the chair of TAM. So you can kind of get a sense of how big a responsibility this is, overseeing that complex and that important an agency with such a big mission is to handling traffic and congestion. So there's just a whole string of credentials for both Stephanie and for David. I'm going to just call out, as was reported earlier, she's now going to be in her 3rd year serving on the Mill Valley City Council, third term on the Mill Valley City Council. She's served as mayor twice. She has served on the Marin County Council of Mayors and City Council members. She's also on the board of the Marin Transit District and of the SMART Board. So the recent past president of the Marin Council of Mayors and City Council members. So we're in good hands with her leadership on that topic. And then we'll also hear from David Schonbrunn, who's the president of TransDEF. TransDEF stands for Transportation Solutions, Defense, and Education Fund. It's a Marin-based nonprofit organization. It advocates for regional planning to deal with our transportation and land use and air quality issues. So David has been, really fighting, it seems, for years to transform MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. 21 years, I read on your website. He's sued them 6 times, shut off its $9 billion in federal funding at least once. He uses the process of EIRs to challenge work that's going forward, especially with the California High-Speed Rail Authority, and he is a champion of SMART. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and interaction with the audience. So to get us started, Stephanie Moulton-Peters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Susan, for a nice introduction, and to Marin Coalition for inviting me to speak here today. It's good to see so many of you that I know here in the audience. I want to acknowledge today that with me are members of the TAM staff, Dan Sherrier and Nick Nguyen. They are here to provide detailed answers to questions that may come up, and I'm going to stay on the higher level, which is what policymakers are supposed to do. So that's how we'll divide it up for today. Susan is right. Traffic is an ever-present situation. A Mill Valley resident, George Gordon, said to me while I was campaigning, he said, Stephanie, traffic, this happens, these cycles. We have economic booms, houses turn over, they get remodeled, traffic increases, everyone goes crazy, then a recession hits and things settle down and goes back to normal. And George says during his 50 or 60 years of living in Mill Valley, he's seen at least 3 or 4 of these cycles. So I don't mean to minimize it at all, but as another young Mill Valleyan said, traffic is sort of an ambient problem all over California. So I don't think we should feel singled out in Marin County. But it is a problem, and it is a great source of frustration for all of us. Susan did a great job of giving you an introduction to TAM. I'm going to spend just a little time going into some depth about what we do and how. I want to draw your attention to some great little reports that Susan suggested I bring. There's a few copies on each table, and these outline what it is that TAM does with the money that we raise through our half-cent sales tax and our $10 vehicle registration license fee. So it is true, TAM is JPA. It was formed in 2004 to administer the sales tax that voters of Marin County passed in 2004. We became what's known as a self-help county. This is where the voters decided that solving traffic and transportation problems was important enough that we would tax ourselves a half cent to do a variety of different things to address traffic, and I'll talk a little bit about each of those today. In 2010, the legislature allowed us to add a $10 charge, again approved by the voters, to our vehicle license fee that you pay when you register your vehicle. And this augmented our TAM budget for our transportation strategies by about another $2 million a year. We find at TAM, our local dollars that we generate, all of us together, comprise 72% of the Transportation Authority of Marin budget. And that is really worth noting, that we are truly paying for the bulk of our transportation improvements. The other roughly 25% comes from state and federal gas tax sources and from regional bridge toll funds, and also then from grants that we receive. But it is really significant to note that our local money is what drives most of what happens in Marin County. As I said, TAM sponsors a wide array of transportation and traffic mitigation related programs and projects. We have 4 major strategies. I'm just going to list them off very briefly. The details are in the pamphlets that I gave you. Strategy number 1 is local bus transit system. This is our Marin Transit bus service, local service, our rural community shuttles that go to West Marin. We have our special needs transit, that's paratransit and rides for seniors, and then it funds bus transit facilities to a small extent. Strategy 2 has been completed. This was money that we put forth to finish carpool lanes along the 101 from San Rafael out through Terra Linda and to Novato. So that's called our Highway 101 Carpool Gap Closure Lane Project. Strategy 3 is our local transportation infrastructure, probably the most popular with our local people. This is repair of your local roads and of the major arterials in southern, central, and northern Marin County. That includes Sir Francis Drake, Novato Boulevard, West End Avenue in San Rafael, and Miller Avenue in southern Marin. And finally, strategy 4 is to reduce school-related congestion and provide safer access to schools. I want to acknowledge Wendy Cowens here from Safe Routes to School. We've worked together for almost 15 years now, on the Safe Routes to School program. This funding also pays for crossing guards, which have been hugely important to encouraging kids to walk and bike. And it also funds our Safe Pathways projects, which are improvements to sidewalks, bike lanes, and intersection crossings. Moving briefly to Measure B. And Susan, where am I in time? Just
2 minutes.
2 more minutes?
Almost at the 2-minute mark.
Okay. So very quickly, we've augmented with the additional Measure B funding through our vehicle license program. And again, we focused these on local streets and roads and bike and pedestrian pathways, mobility management programs, volunteer drivers, and also safe routes to school, ride sharing, and some programs to support electric vehicles and other different fuel programs. Just very quickly, other related transportation agencies that are not in TAM include Marin Transit, as I mentioned, and Marin Transit receives a full 55% of TAM's funding every year. So again, that is a lot of money that we as voters dedicated to continuing our transportation services, very important, and they're highly used by transit dependent. Golden Gate Bridge District, entirely separate from TAM and receives their funding from bridge tolls and other sources. The SMART Board, as was mentioned, I serve on that. The funding for SMART comes from a separate Measure Q and from other sources as well. And then there's everyone's favorite Caltrans that is responsible for constructing, maintaining, and operating our highways. So I was asked to describe what is TAM doing about traffic, and I'm going to take a brief detour to the city of Mill Valley, where I'm from, because I wanted to share that on a very micro level, we are doing similar work to what TAM is doing, and our issues are very much the same as your local communities. We have a road network, as does most of Marin, that was built a very long time ago for horses and buggies and wagons. We have our wonderful little villages and towns that were served by rail, and they're usually at the end of a very long valley or peninsula. So we used to have direct rail transit between all the cities. That went away. It was replaced by the 101 freeway and predecessor highways, and you have to drive a ways to get to them. In the last 3 or 4 years, Mill Valley has faced incredible traffic problems, as has any other community in Marin. We got a traffic committee going of citizens and elected officials at all levels of government, a traffic engineer, and city and county staff. And here's what we learned. We did a very detailed study at my request to get to know on a very granular level what the nature and composition of our traffic is. And we have really drilled down, and we try to know on almost a per car basis who's in them and pretty much where's their general destination. Here's what we've learned. Our traffic is not because of an increasing population. Our population of 14,000 has not increased. And similarly, Marin County's grows very slowly as well. However, our school-age population has increased, and Mill Valley schools have grown by 1/3 in the last 10 years. We are seeing school populations that we have not seen since the 1970s and 80s, when we had very full schools. Many of you might have been raising your children at that time, and you know. What has also happened in the intervening years is that we closed schools, so that we have a lot of cross-town traffic now that we didn't have when we had neighborhood schools that kids could walk and bike to more easily. We have a culture change too. Many of the people in this room, and myself included, walked and biked or took a school bus to school. And many have said to me they wouldn't have been caught dead letting their parents drive them to school. It was not culturally cool to do that. That has all changed, and kids walking and biking was a rarity. And I saw this when my kids were 3 and 5 years old, and have worked with Safe Routes to shift that. We now have 60% of our middle school kids walking and biking. We have increased jobs. We have increased remodeling and California. So it's an economic boom. It's very good, but it's very frustrating, and I'm going to guess that many of you in this room do not have kids that are in the school boom population, and you're not doing major remodels on your homes right now. You may be deriving economic benefit from what's going on, but what the problem is for all of us long-term Marin residents is that we feel the squeeze of all this activity going on around us. So my city, and I think Tam in general knows, there's no silver bullets. You have to work on a lot of different strategies. They fall into 4 different categories, which I'll say really quickly. They fall into reducing demand for travel in cars. It falls into making operational efficiency improvements in your signals and other technologies. There is capacity increases to our roads and highways. This is always the most expensive. And frankly, if adding lanes to freeways was the answer to traffic, LA would have no traffic. So there's a little thought about that. And then there's looking at the big issue, and I think Bruce Corcoran raised this at our last traffic committee meeting. We have to look at land use planning and development in what we're doing. I have to wrap up. I will say that TAM is looking into the same things on a macro level, all of these strategies, and that we will be developing a strategic vision plan. And today I will be listening to your questions and comments about where we go in the future and what will make it work better for you. And we will fold these into our strategies and then pursue them. Thank you very much.
First, a quick introduction, self-introduction. I don't actually, maybe this is on, okay. My background is different from many Californians in that for people that only know California, transit is unfamiliar and rather stigmatized. I'm from New York, where transit was a regular part of life. I walked and took the bus to school. I commuted by train. I know from personal experience that a life can be based on transit. I am a generalist and a holistic thinker and am entirely self-taught on transportation. I do not fit into the local control versus regionalism dichotomy. Instead, I'm something of an iconoclast. I was president of our homeowners association, and I led a fight against growth up on Mount Tam. I was trained by the Marin Conservation League, and I've since transitioned to a broader view, and I've long been involved in left-right alliances, such as Ralph Nader has been writing about. My work on high-speed rail has been in coalition with very strongly right-wing oriented people. My goal is to introduce to you this broader view that I have come to. I am going to ask you to step briefly out of your perspective as homeowners for a little while. I'm not asking you to believe me, I'm just asking you to put your beliefs on hold for a moment and check out the logic of what I'm saying. I believe you'll be amazed at where the logic takes you. Why does traffic keep getting worse? Clearly, transportation professionals do not understand the problem. In fact, by continuing to apply conventional wisdom, they make it worse. And I'm saying that in full knowledge of everyone here. Ask yourself this question: what happens when a substantial fraction of Bay Area residents are all on the road commuting? 1 million plus people can't all be on the road at the same time, driving alone, and have a convenient trip. It's not possible. There isn't capacity on the road for that many cars, and there'll never be enough capacity because the costs to build additional lanes are way too high and the physical space to build additional lanes isn't available. So that kind of solution, if it ever was a solution, is not available. I assert it is a fantasy that commuting alone is feasible in a metropolitan area. Yet our country spends hundreds of billions of dollars in pursuit of that fantasy. The message is, we really want this to work, so it's gotta work, whether it makes sense or not. And frankly, this is the question that never gets asked. The response is interim thinking, let's just widen this highway because we obviously need to do that because there's too many cars. I'm sorry, no, your thought process does not work. I propose that what we're facing is the fallout of a set of assumptions buried so deeply in the culture that they are invisible. The United States has the most individualistic culture in human history. The auto industry has promoted the notion of suburban freedom in furtherance of this individualism. Notice how auto commercials always feature a single vehicle surrounded by beautiful natural scenery. They are evoking the myth of freedom. But the reality of driving is far different. The reality for most people is being stuck in traffic. You're never going to see a car commercial about sitting there stuck in traffic. It's not going to happen. Here's my thesis. Serious challenges of an entirely new scale are forcing change upon us. We are seeing both the limits of individualism and its consequences. We've simultaneously reached the limits of the transportation system and the limits of the planet's ability to absorb carbon dioxide. The symptoms are congestion and climate change. The problem is in how we think about how we need to act. This suggests that the suburban enterprise is no longer workable, that we shouldn't be building more of it. However, trillions of dollars of private and public investment have been committed to suburbia, so if there's a challenge to that model, it's really scary. I believe people are vaguely aware of this change, but are too overwhelmed by its magnitude to be willing to think about it. I suggest that this deep subject is what we all should be talking about. Instead, people focus on trying to hold on to what they've got, because it is truly beautiful here in Marin, and everybody's really protective of what they've got. People rightfully don't want it screwed up, and there's nothing wrong with that. I believe that this is the source of the activism in this county against housing. However, I believe opponents of more housing have misdiagnosed the problem. First, let's clarify. This is a vehicle problem, not a people problem. It's how many vehicles are added. The diagnosis that growth will bring more traffic and will create intolerable conditions is partly correct. Where it fails is in the assumption that future growth will be inevitably just like the present, with everyone driving alone. This is known as the tyranny of the present, the inability to imagine significant change. But there are very different patterns of growth possible. Look at Europe and Japan, for example. The whole question of growth and our future hangs on what kind of growth we will have and whether we decide to change course. Frankly, there's no way to lock in the present in amber, despite how much people want to do so. The future will be here soon. So let's figure out how to make the future work better than the present. It's obvious we can't keep going the way we've been going. That's why the furious opposition to Plan Bay Area was on the wrong side of history. Plan Bay Area land use is a huge step forward in understanding how to thoughtfully move into the future. It's based on the premise of not disturbing existing single-family neighborhoods and placing future growth in compact development in areas like dead shopping centers, for example, near convenient transit. This is how to accommodate growth but not place additional burden on the roadways. And the idea of transit-oriented development and priority development areas, these are the tools to implement this kind of compact development. Interestingly enough, it was the transportation side of Plan Bay area that was the massive failure, in my opinion, because MTC is still focused on serving the solo driver, no matter what the Chronicle said on Sunday. When an existing mental framework stops working, this is known as a paradigm shift. I believe that's what we are experiencing. People naturally want to preserve what they are familiar with. Naturally, they resist change. However, preventing change simply is not possible. It is no longer possible to have what we used to have. This is the key to the whole issue, I believe. It's a very tough reality to accept, but times have changed. This is the fundamental stop point that I believe all policy disagreements turn on. Talking about this fundamental question, I believe, will be very productive. I believe this change to be inescapable. The question then becomes, do we gracefully transition to a new future, or do we fight the inevitable and have an entire system break down into gridlock? I think it's time to move into new thoughts and approaches. People like to visit Europe, but they can't imagine having here what they have there. We could speak French here. My assertion is that we have to change to a transportation system much more like Europe than the familiar American suburban model. Our deeply committed understanding is that mobility equals car. I'm sorry, that no longer works. I think we'll call it right. Oh, thank you. Even better. So, for people can't imagine life without a car. This again is the tyranny of the present, and that's because the public sector is so atrophied. We need to transition away from the near total dependence on driving alone. It used to be possible to take the train from Fairfax to Sausalito and the ferry and get to San Francisco faster than you can now get there by car during rush hour. We need to have that kind of convenience throughout the region. And I think we'll leave it. We'll just say one thought. People assume that because they can easily drive around when traffic is light, that they ought to be able to have the same convenience when traffic is heavy. That's simply wrong. Travel during peak periods is a different kind of travel. It is inherently mass transportation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Hopefully you're going to be standing, and you'll use that mic for response to questions. So I'll go through the audience to take a few questions and just ask that you keep your questions as short and precise as possible, because I already see a lot of hands, and then asking our responders to keep their questions or their answers short as much as possible. So, Richard, let's start here.
Hi, Richard Hall, European, formerly. Suburbia, various parts of
but you've left.
Correct.
You abandoned Europe.
I didn't like the format.
Dual citizenship. Yay!
I have dual citizenship,
Yeah.
that's good. Others understand. I also have 2 school-age kids, so I am a member. I don't know how many people have school-age kids.
Okay,
So question, the single biggest project in this county, which both of you support, Stephanie, you're on the board, and I spoke at that board meeting last week, is Measure Q, SMART. And that we were told as voters this was despite climate change and that it was environmentally friendly. That was probably the reason it passed, because we were told this.
You need the mic nearer your mouth.
Thank you. So let me put it really close to my mouth. So Measure Q told us as voters that the train would fight climate change and be environmentally friendly. The train, according to Caltrans, the California Air Resources Board, emits 19.6 kilograms of CO2 per mile. Cars, by comparison, emit 340 grams if you take the car figures. That's specifically for Marin cars. So the train emits 57 times more CO2 per mile than cars. Now you also have to assume 42% of riders are displaced car riders. So really you would need 137 people on each train. So I'm getting there. 137 people on each train, which you'll never achieve because even New Jersey Transit can't get 32 and a half on a train. So given this, the train is not green. It will never be green. It is impossible.
Where's
to
the
be
question,
green.
please?
Can we revisit Measure Q? Because we were basically promised a train and voted for it because it was green. And clearly this is a charade. Can we revisit Measure Q?
Bravo.
No.
More precise.
So, Stephanie, do you have a comment?
I heard you, Richard, present all this information. I'm not a technical expert on that. I did, however, ride the Caltrain on the peninsula. The trains that run from San Jose to San Francisco, I rode those for 2 years. It was a fabulous commute. It's a lifestyle. You are on the train in the morning getting ready for your morning meetings and doing your calendar, and you're coming home at night relaxing, and you're a nice person when you get home because you didn't drive. So again, I can't speak to the technical issues. I absolutely believe that it will get cars off the road and that it will be used in abundance. It will be the fourth lane on 101 that will be traveling at 70 miles an hour during the commute when the rest of them are crawling along at about 30.
Okay, Eleanor? Okay, thank you.
And
both.
stand, please, just so it's
easier
for everybody to hear.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions, actually. It's, do you have a research and analysis department in the Transportation Agency to do cost benefits? And if so, how is that working? If the other thing is, what are you doing to make people more aware of the fact that we really are a rural community like Yosemite Park? We have limits in how we want to keep our open space and our coast. So how can you adjust that to women needing cars for transportation, for groceries, for school? And I see it as a women's issue.
So my own sense, Eleanor, is that there's a hierarchy of trips and we make them in different ways. And going to the market and doing some other things, if you're providing for a family, you might not do on transit. You might if you were a single or a couple. There are things like daily commutes that lend themselves to mass transit and school buses for getting kids to school. So I think we have differentiated approaches. We do have staff that look at costs very carefully. If we did a cost benefit, I think we would never build another freeway. They are by far the most expensive way of getting people around. So as I said, we have a four-legged strategy at TAM and we do a little bit of everything to meet the needs of all users.
I've spent over 20 years fighting MTC precisely because they don't care at all about cost effectiveness. The principal criterion for getting a project approved at MTC is it BART? And BART is extraordinarily expensive. So MTC does not care at all about cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness is critical for making decisions about transportation.
Okay, next question from Keith Whitmore.
Yeah, resident Bill Valley, 35 years. Parents taking children to school are 60% of our rush hour congestion. I've discovered today directly from the police that in fact there have been in the last 3 years, there have only been 7 people a year who had any collision with a car, and none of those were seriously injured. I suspect that if teachers just asked their class how they came to school that day, and then compared that with the register and wrote to the parents, we might have a tremendous change from these, Range Rovers and so on, and we get back to the bicycle and the foot. Secondly, roundabouts. If we had roundabouts in Mill Valley, that would cut out 11 hours a year. I calculated this by sitting at traffic lights and timing them. And roundabouts don't go off if there's a blackout. And finally, the Water Board about 30 years ago now, 20 years ago certainly, decided that they would allow more water hookups. If you stopped water hookups, there's no way this problem is going to get worse in terms of people, is it?
Address the safest.
Let's go here and then we'll go to.
So, Susan, do you want us to
Yeah,
do a
you
quick
wanna
response?
respond
So, Keith, 3 short answers. You'll be pleased to know the Safe Routes
Hold the
program.
microphone horizontal.
The Safe Routes program does exactly what you said. They have teachers in classrooms asking kids how they got to school every day. And then we have a whole education encouragement program for kids and parents on how to walk and bike to school. So we do that. The second thing you'll be glad to know is that Mill Valley is going to be looking into roundabouts. More people have gotten on board since the last time we all were in the planning for Miller Avenue. So we are going to look at these. And finally, water hookups, got to bring somebody from MMWD here, so to answer that one. Next.
My name is Wendy Callens, and I just have to correct, 21 to 30% of morning traffic is school-related, not 60%. And as a matter of fact, 50% of children actually take what we call a green way to school. So we've made tremendous strides. My question is mostly to you, Stephanie, and I'd like you to put your Marin Transit hat on. You mentioned the school closures as one thing that for neighborhood schools. The other thing you did not mention is the elimination of bus service to schools. Marin Transit is just completing a bus study to see about reintroducing yellow buses, and I wonder if you could give us a little sneak preview of what may be coming.
Yeah.
Please say 60%, not 30.
I'm sorry, all right.
Okay, let's talk about school buses. This is a very exciting potential, and I want to acknowledge Supervisor Rice, who also is on the Marin Transit Board with me. She, I, and Supervisor Kate Sears all pushed very hard to have a school bus study done. It has yielded the predictable results. There are lots of trips that could be saved if kids were riding school buses the way they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. The promise.
Or Prop 13.
Yeah, before the schools didn't have money to afford them anymore. We are seeing savings in traffic in both Tiburon and Belvedere that have instituted a 1-year pilot project. We've got a yellow school bus program out in Supervisor Rice's district that is working very well. It is being used as a congestion management tool. What does that mean? It means Mill Valley has identified that 700 car trips in the morning go over the 101 Blythedale overpass to get kids back and forth to school. We are considering school buses to reduce this congestion. That means not every kid will get offered a ride, but probably the ones who are riding across town over that bridge will be offered a school bus service first. Figuring out how to pay for it is another matter, but it is very promising. It relieves traffic for others, Eleanor, like yourself, who need to get out and do your errands.
Despite considerable investment of money from the half-cent traffic congestion sales tax fund, bicycle counts have declined significantly in the past 7 years during the weekdays, 31%, according to the congestion management report presented at the September TAM board meeting. So, in other words, money that was supposed to reduce congestion that was spent on bikeways did not help traffic congestion at all. In fact, arguably there was an inverse correlation there, perhaps because lanes got narrowed to add the bikes in. So, given that you have a limited budget and have to set priorities, what should you do differently going forward?
So one of the failings in the measurements that we take is that we don't measure local bike trips. We tend to measure the long ones on the north-south greenway. We have an aging demographic. That has something to do with ridership. If we were to measure local trips made by local kids and adults, you would see a much higher use of the bike lanes. So I've been pushing for, let's measure in the places that most people use. And the thing we also have to realize is that we've got some big gaps in our system, and until those gaps are filled, the system can't really operate at optimal levels.
Okay, I'll take one more question on this side and then work my way over to that side. So.
As a member of that demographic, I'm concerned about...
The school children?
Not anymore. Although my son was the only one in his school who rode to kindergarten on his bike. And he's still on the bike. Anyway, about air quality, I would like to know if it is true that the train will cause more pollution than we have now. Is that because of the fuel that is going to be used? And if so, is there any way to make it better for the environment?
The federal EPA has issued regulations having to do with diesel engines. The smart vehicles will meet the very latest EPA standards. It's known as Tier 4. And so I believe your question is framed based on technology of about 15 years ago, but the world of diesel engines has changed dramatically. And so the entire pollution picture from modern diesel engines, they've essentially eliminated what had been the big problems.
Just ask VW.
My question relates to the gas tax. There's a problem with the gas tax because more and more cars are not using gas as much or at all. And I've heard something about vehicle miles traveled, an alternative way to raise money in place of the gas tax. And I'm wondering where that effort is, if it's a viable effort, what the status is.
There is a study process underway at the state level called the Road User Charge Task Force or something similar to that. They're developing ideas, concepts. The state of Oregon is currently piloting a program that uses several different techniques to capture mileage, including just simply driving in once a year or multiple times a year to a station that will put down the odometer readings. But in short, I believe this is likely to be the future, and it's actually a good thing. One of the huge problems with driving is it is unpriced in terms of mileage. And as such, this is, in economic terms, a free good. And a free good gets overused. And that's why everybody and their brother is on the highway. When roads are priced, not just I'm talking about pricing beyond the level of the gas tax, but maybe I should clarify what I'm saying here. A road user fee could be set so as to yield the same revenue as the gas tax. In other words, it's just simply coming in a different way. From my standpoint as an advocate, I believe that it is critical for our future to put an appropriate price on driving so that driving it will be seen as an economic choice in competition with other options for travel, including transit, carpooling, biking, etc. to me, that's what I see as the future.
Okay, I think we've got time for 2 more questions over here, and then you'll both have a chance to give a final minute or so wrap-up comment. So,
just a quick comment with respect to the schools. We live in the west end of San Rafael and Sun Valley. We get a minimum of 200 cars with 1 person, 1 kid, and only 1 school bus. So the sooner you can fix that, I mean, it's a travesty. Number 2, a couple of years ago at my Rotary Club, we had a presentation by folks trying to resurrect the trolley between Fairfax and San Rafael's Transit Center. Is there anything still working on that?
We are still looking at the trolley. It doesn't, in terms of the question asked earlier on cost effectiveness or cost benefit, it is more expensive than other options, specifically more bus service. So in a time of limited funds, I think it's a great option. It hasn't shown itself to pencil out, but I should say we're looking at the entire Ross Valley corridor at this point and what can be done to ameliorate traffic, and that is one of the ideas that's still in the mix. And I completely agree with you about the school buses to school, make a huge difference.
Speaking as a transit activist, I think the trolley proposal is silly. And it doesn't bear scrutiny because Marin is basically not growing. If Marin were growing, it could be at least discussed. What would be appropriate for that corridor is heavy bus rapid transit. In other words, a lot of frequent buses going down that corridor. And I have proposed the use of a rush hour only HOV lane on Sir Francis Drake and the Miracle Mile that would give priority to buses and carpools because there are simply too many cars trying to get down Sir Francis Drake. And if we give an advantage to cars that are where there are people sharing, they are the ones, they are generating a public good, and other people would just simply wait their turn.
okay, final question here from Bruce.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Bruce Corcoran. I live in Strawberry. Again, I want to congratulate Stephanie on her re-election to the Mill Valley City Council. People in Strawberry don't get to vote for Mill Valley Council. We're an unincorporated part of the county. But we do have common interests, and we share in public schools. I think, as most of you know, the intersection of, or the interchange of 101 and East Blythedale Tiburon Boulevard is highly congested, particularly during peak hours. And there's an intersection in Strawberry, Tiburon Boulevard and Redwood Frontage Road, that operates currently at level of service E or F. It's a failing intersection. And yet the Board of Supervisors keeps promoting projects in Strawberry that will increase traffic. There's an issue before the Board of Supervisors, for example, in December, which will consider converting office space at Belvedere Place, which is the office complex above In-N-Out Burger, from general office use to medical office use. That'll increase traffic by 1,200 trips per day. They're also considering putting a medical marijuana dispensary in Strawberry. Who knows how much more traffic that will produce. And I think all of you have probably read that Branson wants to move to the seminary with a 1,000 student campus that'll employ 200 employees, and also they're talking about 300 new apartments in Strawberry in that same complex. So my question is this. The TAM board has 11 members from cities and towns, which is a majority. 5 supervisors also sit on that board. And so my question is this, and I appreciate an answer from both Stephanie and David. When will the TAM board recognize the impact of the projects that the Board of Supervisors are promoting, which not only impacts Strawberry, but will impact everyone up and down the 101 corridor, And when will the majority of the board, the 11 cities and towns, stand up to the Board of Supervisors and ask them, or say to them, the projects you're promoting do not make sense, and when are you going to hold them accountable for some of the very highly questionable decisions they make?
I would say this, Bruce, you've done a good job of raising the level of awareness in the greater Mill Valley area, including at the Mill Valley City Council. So I think that's actually more crucial than anything that TAM does. The 11 cities and towns operate independently. They look at their land use issues and the county in the various areas. So I don't think there's a one answer about how to make this happen, other than each community needs to work with their local electeds at both the city and the county level to see what makes sense. And so I'll leave it at that.
I would say that you've given us a perfect example of the tyranny of the present. That what you have laid out is the world as you know it being extrapolated off into the future. And the thesis that I've presented today is we can't do that. It doesn't work. Therefore, we have to do something new and different, something that takes all of this into consideration. I suggest we have that discussion rather than the question, how do we lock everything down and keep it all the same, just like it is right this minute?
David, that sounded like a lot like a summary kind of speech. Do you want to just take any additional 30 seconds or so, your wrap-up comment, and then to Stephanie for her final comment?
I did kind of hit it there.
You did.
I think I will gracefully step aside.
Okay. So look, I probably had 20 minutes worth of remarks to give in 10 minutes, so there's an awful lot that I didn't share. Perhaps you'll invite me back another time and we'll talk some more. I want to tell you that, again, the Transportation Authority of Marin is sorry, been up too late campaigning last night. We are taking all different approaches. We are focused on transit, we are focused on making freeway improvements, we are focused on getting kids out of cars to school. We will see the third lane on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge open by the end of 2017. We're working to try and shorten that. That 10% of people that come over the Golden Gate Bridge actually go over the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. It's not a huge number, but what I can tell you is that 10 to 15% additional traffic can be the amount that overwhelms the system. And so we know in Mill Valley we've been overwhelmed at some of our intersections by growth of 10 to 15%. So really that's the goal, is to try, at least in the short term, and provide these interim solutions to reduce traffic to restore the flow. We've got the North-South Greenway to Novato that will be built out over time at third lane. There's a lot of tradespeople that come down from Sonoma County and they're not going to ride the train. So they will have a third lane eventually. We also have continuing efforts to change out through ride share, through carpooling, van pooling, use of electric vehicles. So I just want to say we're trying to hit it on all different fronts because we know that we need to do it. There's no silver bullet. There's silver buckshot, and that's what we got to work on. I do encourage you all to participate in the strategic vision plan that will be going on. You'll hear more about it. And truly, we know that we need to hear from everybody and that people have different traffic and travel needs, and our job is to try and meet them.